You know, it's times like this I'm really happy to be a One Piece fan. Like, I really am. You know, One Piece, something that sets it apart from its contemporaries. I mean, there's a lot of things, but one of the big things is just how long the story has gone on for, okay? And there's this sense of like patience that if you're a One Piece fan, you kind of have to have. Because one thing that Oda does not do is he really doesn't like to rush character introductions. So if Oda has an idea for a character, he might name drop that character hundreds and hundreds of chapters before that character actually finally shows up. And I also have to kind of commend him for that too. There's a little bit of a restraint that has to be exercised there. I'm sure. Don't you think at any other point in the story, Oda was probably sitting there like, man, I really want to introduce Dr. Vegapunk. I really want him to just be thrown into the story. Like, here's what he looks like. Here he is, you know? I'm sure Oda had plenty of times, and there were plenty of opportunities to have that in the story that would have made sense. Like, had Oda just showed us what Vegapunk looked like during the Punk Hazard arc, like during a flashback with Caesar, which he sort of did. We see a silhouette of Vegapunk back then, which actually lines up pretty well with how Vegapunk actually appears in chapter 1066. We finally see his main body, his Stella body. But, you know, he didn't show his full body back then, but he could have. You know, we could have seen what Vegapunk looks like with his giant forehead and his tongue and everything like that back in, like, Punk Hazard, and it would have been fine. But no, Oda is like, I'm going to wait until the story demands Vegapunk to be shown, until we reach the point where it makes sense for the Straw Hats to finally meet Vegapunk and for his appearance to be shown. That is when I will reveal it. No sooner. And for that reason, let me ask you a question. Do you remember the first time Vegapunk was mentioned in this story? The first time we heard the name Dr. Vegapunk? I gotta be honest with you, I even forgot. For the longest time, I thought it was Thriller Bark. I thought it was Kuma was the first person to mention. You know, when Kuma revealed him to be, you know, he had like cybernetic enhancements after Zoro cut him. He revealed, you know, I was operated on and turned into a pacifista, turned into a cyborg by Dr. Vegapunk. But that's actually not true. No. He was actually first name-dropped by Kobe during the post-Enies Lobby arc way back in Volume 45. If you want to be specific, it was chapter 433, which was released. By the way, this blew my mind. I don't think this was on purpose, but still. It was released November 6th, 2006. Compared to Vegapunk's proper introduction into the story, which we just had in the last chapter, chapter 1066, which was released on November 14th, 2022. So, very nearly 16 years exactly from when Vegapunk was first mentioned. The reason why I always forget that Kobe mentioned him was, I don't know, I just had it in my head that Kobe was talking about, like, you know, the scientific advancements, like they have the sea prism under the ships and how they can enter the Grand Line from the comm belt. Like, I remembered that, but I never remembered, like, him actually name-dropping Vegapunk himself. But he did, okay? Go back and read the chapter. So, God, 2006, that is wild. That is insane. Like, do you know what I looked like in 2006? I was in 8th grade in 2006. Look at that. I know. I was going through my goth phase at the time. I don't even look like myself. Look at that hair. Look at that shirt. That shirt actually is green, and it's basically Steve's shirt from Blue's Clues. I had a Blue's Clues goth phase in 2006. Barely looks like me. I've really solidified my look since then. But yeah, so Vegapunk's appearance. Let's just start by talking about that. It's such a surreal thing that I'm finally seeing what Vegapunk looks like, all right? And the thing is, because this character has taken so long to be properly revealed, I honestly think that, like, any appearance could have worked. Like, there were a lot of people that were upset that, like, Vegapunk's appearance is just so goofy, you know, like, really, really goofy. Like, up until now, whenever I make a video about Vegapunk, I always include Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty in the thumbnail because we didn't know what he looked like. I guess I have to stop using Rick now. Yeah, I'm still gonna use Rick. Who cares? But, you know, like, the idea is that Vegapunk, he doesn't look like Rick, but he looks like a character that could appear in Rick and Morty. You know what I mean? Like, you can picture in, like, the next new episode of Rick and Morty, which I think is actually coming next, this Sunday. It's this Sunday. It's, November 20th. It comes back, I think. Anyway, you could picture Rick going to another, like, dimension or another planet where there's a scientist that looks like Vegapunk. He would fit in the show pretty well. So a lot of people are thinking, like, he's too goofy. You know, the giant head and then the tongue, and then, you know, he cuts off his head and separates it into the Stella, not the Stella, he's the Stella, the satellite bodies, and so now he has like an apple core sticking out of his head. I think it works. But also, if Vegapunk did have a more serious look about him, like if he did look like Rick, I think that could have worked too. I mean, he's a mad scientist. You could have made him half robot or full robot. You could have had like this really serious kind of character. Like maybe Vegapunk is like this shriveled up old man that's in like a cryostasis pod or something, like Darth Vader, and just like shh, and has to put on like a helmet and like a breathing apparatus because he's so old. You could have done that too, and I think that would have worked. It's just there was so many good ideas about what Vegapunk was going to look like. But I am kind of happy. I do like the design. I really do. And it feels like it's just Oda. You know what I mean? It's just standard Oda style where it's like, okay, yeah, here's this character that we've been hyping up for like over 16 years now, and he's finally going to make an appearance, and he kind of trolls us a little bit with Lilith and all the other bodies first, and it's like, okay, actually it turns out there's not one Vegapunk, turns out there's actually 7. And just like, okay, so we got to meet the other 6 first, and then it's like now we meet the main body at the very end. I'm happy Vegapunk looks the way he does, okay? The giant head, like the idea that the smarter he gets, his head literally gets bigger, which, by the way, that was something that was already kind of shown in One Piece with Vice Admiral Strawberry, although in the instance with Vice Admiral Strawberry, the explanation on why his head was so big wasn't because he was super intelligent, it was because the sadder he becomes, the larger his forehead gets, and so that's just kind of depressing, but, you know, that's the explanation with Strawberry. For those of you that haven't been reading One Piece for very long and yet are somehow reading chapter 1066, let me tell you, Oda has a certain sense of humor, kind of crossed with, like, I'm just making up logic as it goes. But for some reason, in One Piece, it makes sense. I think it's because, like, when it comes to the serious stuff in One Piece, when it comes to hockey, when it comes to devil fruits, like the power system that exists in the story, Oda's usually pretty good with that. He's pretty consistent with that ability. It's not like, okay, by the way, hockey can now, you know, pull the moon down from orbit. You know, it's like, it sounds like Oda just comes up with like, here's all this crazy new stuff that hockey can do. Whenever he does introduce something like Future Sight, it does kind of make sense with observation. You know what I mean? So with that kind of stuff, it sort of like maintains like consistency and like, you know, the rules that he set in the story. But when it comes to things like everything else, like Luffy losing a tooth, oh yeah, he just drinks some milk and it grows back. Oh yeah, Vegapunk's head is like reaching into the stratosphere just because he read a lot of books. You know what I mean? When it comes to stuff like that, like Frankie's body in and of itself, you know, you know, the fact that Brooks' afro is there, it's just like, you know what? Sure, it just makes sense with the goofy aesthetic of One Piece. So I like the design. Let me know down below on how you feel about the design, whether you like it or you hate it, or you're kind of like, or you gotta wait to see. Which design did you like more? Did you like the design of him in the flashback at O'Hara where he was 43 years old and he had the giant head? Or now in the present where his head's a lot smaller, he has like the apple thing sticking out of it, you know, and he looks, I mean, he's based off of Albert Einstein. He's based off of the famous picture of Albert Einstein, you know, sticking his tongue out, and Oda obviously looking at that picture. Like, I can picture Oda way back in, like, maybe not 2006, because the first, like, appearance we had of Vegapunk's, like, body was when he was working on Kuma, and that was, like, in Kuma's memory, and he seemed to be way taller. He seemed to be, like, 6-7 feet tall and really long limbs, and you don't see the tongue sticking out there, so I'm under the impression, now this is just conjecture, but I'm going to assume Oda did not pin down Vegapunk's design until Punk Hazard. So not in 2006 or 2007, but like a little bit later, he finally nailed down the design, and we see that design in the flashback at Punk Hazard in the silhouette as in the chapter where Caesar blows everything up, okay? I'm sorry, Vegapunk blew everything up. Caesar was completely innocent in that instance there, right? So that's the way I'm thinking about it. So aside from that one image of like the really tall, like striped sweater Vegapunk, aside from that, it fits. You know, and I like the idea that he did just take Albert Einstein and just like over-exaggerate the features to the nth degree or whatever, or the E equals MC squared degree. See, I know physics. E is, wait, okay, hold on. I'm going to try, okay, E is energy, M is mass, C squared. What was the C squared? C squared isn't it like the speed of light in a black hole or something? I'm really out of my depth right now. I don't know. I'm just like... Energy equals mass times the speed of light in a black hole. I'm going to assume that's what it is. Someone correct me if I'm not. Okay, but that was about the appearance, just about that alone. Let's talk about Vegapunk's age, all right? That was something that actually took me more by surprise than his appearance, was the fact that he's only 65 years old right now, which is crazy to me. I don't know. I always pictured Vegapunk as like a really, really old character, to the point of maybe being like several hundred years old, even older than Kureha, and maybe just using his advanced science and, you know, robotic technology and stuff to expedite his life force, something like that, right? But no, he's only 65 years old. Sengoku, Suru, Garp are all well older than him. You know, when it comes to his other research partners that they work together in MADS, we had Judge Vinsmoke and we had Queen. They're only 10 years younger than him, okay? So Queen and Judge are about 55 right now, and, you know, Vegapunk is 65. So that means, you know, like, when they were all working at MADS together, which would have been prior to his meeting with Dragon at O'Hara, because it was mentioned that Vegapunk had recently joined the world government 22 years ago at the disaster of O'Hara, and this was 2 years after Roger had been executed. We're going to get a little bit into the backstory here in a second to see where all these things line up, but yeah, if that's the case, then let's say maybe 10 years prior to that, maybe not even that far, maybe like only 5 years prior to that. Let's say 5 years prior to that meeting at O'Hara with Dragon and Vegapunk, when Vegapunk would have been 38 years old. Maybe he was still the lead scientist of MADS at that point, which would make Judge and Queen like in their late 20s. Something like that, which makes sense as well. I mean, scientific research, it takes a long time, and we just don't know a lot about Queen and Judge's past. We know Queen was definitely working for Kaido when, like, Odin was still alive, and they attacked, you know, Odin and the Scabbards attacked Kaido at Udon. Queen and King were there during that battle, and that was about 20 years ago. So we know it was at some point prior to that that MADS was broken up by the government, and Vegapunk went to go work for them. Judge went off to the German Kingdom, and Queen went off to work for Kaido. So, yeah, just a little bit about that. So let's talk about him joining the world government, because that was something that Dragon specifically brought up. The way that I'm piecing this together right now, and this might not be accurate, this is just me looking at the evidence we have available and just connecting the dots as best as I can. We saw Dragon during the execution of Gold D. Roger. He was there at Logtown. This was 2 years prior to him meeting Vegapunk at O'Hara, or 2 years prior from O'Hara's, like, Buster Call occurring, okay? Dragon would have been 31 at the execution of Gold D. Roger. Yes, he's 55 right now. A lot of characters in One Piece are 55, actually. Judge... I think Judge and Queen are the same age, and Dragon's definitely 55, so whatever. That's like when they're at their peak of their power in the One Piece world, right? They're mid-50s. That's the peak of your ability. Might also be because I think Oda's getting to that age as well, so he just, maybe Oda will keep changing the peak performance. Like, you're at your peak when you're 30s. No, Oda's now in his 40s, so it's your 40s that you're at your strongest. Oda's about to turn 50. No, it's actually your 50s that you're at the strongest, right? I don't know. But yeah, so I like to think after the execution of Gold D. Roger and after the Great Pirate Era began, we don't know a lot about Dragon's past, and we're going to find out about it more in the future, obviously. I think that's one of the things Oda was setting up in the last chapter as well. Like, pay attention to Dragon. We're going to find out maybe a little bit of stuff about Dragon in this arc, and then after this arc, maybe a lot about, like, the revolutionaries and everything. I think that's the moment, though, or around that time of the execution of Roger, is when Dragon decided to start the Freedom Fighters. They were not the Revolutionary Army yet. They were just a ragtag band of people with like-minded ideals to oppose the Tenryubito and the world government, okay? And it started very small scale kind of a situation. It also implies that Dragon and Vegapunk were already acquainted with one another because Dragon trusted Vegapunk enough to invite him to join the Freedom Fighters in those early days. So I like to think while Vegapunk was still the lead scientist of MADS, Dragon was acquainted with him back then, okay? Which brings up an interesting question, and it involves Dragon, and we'll find out about it later. What was Dragon up to before he created the Freedom Fighters? Even if you want to say he did not create the Freedom Fighters after Roger's execution, if you want to say the Freedom Fighters had been doing, you know, their activities like, you know, maybe a couple of years before Roger's execution, still, the way that he talked about it when he met Vegapunk at Ohara, it implies the Freedom Fighters had not been around for very long. It's not like, you know, Dragon was heading this organization up for like, you know, 10, 15 years. They seem to be only around for the last few years because they were very small at that point. Vegapunk mentioned that they were a relatively poor organization made with just like a few people at that point, and that's the reason Vegapunk refused Dragon's offer. It's because you don't really have a proper base of operations, you don't have enough funding, you know, what good is my great intelligence if I actually can't make the stuff that I want to make that's in my head? Okay, so that's why he turned Dragon down. So, I want to know more about Dragon's past. You know, the whole thing is maybe he's connected to the Celestial Dragons, maybe he was a Celestial Dragon, or maybe not he was a Celestial Dragon, because that would also have implications with Garp and Luffy, but maybe he married into a Celestial Dragon family, and that leads us off a whole other tangent with, like, okay, what about, Dragon being Robin's dad, which I've been seeing those theories being dusted off. I also made a video years ago about what if Roger was actually Robin's dad, because the thing is, like, Robin's mom has white hair, and Robin herself has black hair, so the implication is that Robin's dad, whoever it is, has black hair. It's like, now the problem there is there's a lot of characters in One Piece that have black hair, so Dragon and Roger are just, you know, two examples of that. But that's a discussion for a completely other video. I feel like I'm just going to go off on that for the rest of the video. This is a video about Vegapunk specifically, okay? However, it is important to bring up, though, that Dragon did say he was acquainted with Clover, which means if you were acquainted with Clover, that means he was probably visiting Ohara quite often, which means maybe back in the time when Olvia was there, so who knows? Maybe Dragon, if Dragon and Olvia got together and had Robin, Olvia would not have been Luffy's mom because she was dead by the time Luffy was born, so at best they would be half-siblings, which is interesting in its own right, but like I said, I'm already going on another tangent. This is Vegapunk's video, okay? We'll talk about Dragon later. Damn you, Oda, this is what you do. It's like, oh, by the way, here's Vegapunk's body, but also we get a lot of stuff about Dragon in this chapter. Trying to split my attention. Okay. So, Vegapunk decided to join the world government, though. Okay, now the reason he said that was because, listen, the world government is a huge organization, Dragon. Okay, it's not just the stuffy shirts at Marie Joie that are the entirety of the world government. That is the core of the organization, sure, and that's where all the Tenryubito live, and they're oppressive and everything like that. But the entire organization at large, I mean, there's bases all over the world. The Marines are also technically part of the world government, and Vegapunk even specifically mentions the Marines, like, hey, there's a lot of people in the world government that are really nice and amenable and aren't as cruel as the Tenryubito are, and you'll find a lot of decent people actually in the Marines. And yeah, that's true. There's a lot of Marines that genuinely join up, not to just be puppets of the world government, because they're genuinely interested in justice, in helping people and innocent civilians. Kobe's a perfect example of that. Garp is a perfect example of that, right? Okay, you'll find a lot of Marines that are good, and it seemed like that's what Vegapunk was focusing on. You know, it's like, oh, most of the people that I'm friends with in the world government are Marines that are all about justice and great ideals and everything. Dragon's not sold on it, though, because Dragon's freedom fighters at this point, Kuma, Ivankov, Dragon, I'm sure a few other members they had at that point, it wasn't a very big organization, were opposed to the world government. Now, remember, Vegapunk specifically said, do not lose sight of the goal, Dragon. And I think what Vegapunk meant by that was, it's really easy to just paint the entire world government organization as corrupt, and you need to, like, pull the whole thing down, right? And maybe very well that might have been the freedom fighters' goal at the beginning, just destroy the entire world government and start over with something new. But I think over the years, maybe because Vegapunk and Dragon still stayed in touch, they were just talking in one of the last chapters, so they're still, you know, their relationship is a little bit more amenable now. They're not as, like, on, opposite ends as they were back at O'Hara, where Dragon was like, I can't believe you became a government dog, Vegapunk, something like that. Now it seems they're getting along better, and maybe that's where Dragon came with the idea, like, hey, maybe we should focus more on the Tenryubito, not on the world government. If anything, that's probably what the world government wants you to think. They want you to think the whole organization has all this power, and they're all just as bad, and it's like sort of this oppressive force of like, we can't fight against the entire world government. It's impossible. But it isn't. It's just that little kernel of the Tenryubito that really are holding all the cards. If you can eliminate them, then, the infrastructure of the world government can stay, and you might have to implement, like, a new group of, like, the Gorosei might have to be abolished, and obviously Eam, so, there's a whole thing there in those situations. But yeah, Vegapunk definitely seems dedicated to the cause, if nothing else, or at least very sympathetic to the cause, okay? And also, at the end of the day, it really did help that Vegapunk joined the world government, because now you got a man on the inside. Now, granted, Shaka did say in the last chapter, like, yeah, even though I'm a high-ranking member of the world government, that changes nothing. Government affiliation changes nothing. It doesn't matter how important I am to them, and I'm their lead scientist and making all this really cool stuff and gadgets and robots and everything for them. It doesn't matter. They're not going to reveal the deep-seated secrets of the Void Century to me, no matter how important I am. But that only implies, like, the stuff, like, about the Void Century, where the ancient weapons are, Eam's existence. That stuff they're not going to share with Vegapunk, okay? However, Vegapunk has still been working for the world government for over 2 decades now. I'm sure he's got plenty of information that the Revolutionary Army would, find useful, that he's probably been feeding to the Revolutionary Army for the past 2 decades now, okay? There's, of course, the whole theory of the Pacifistas and the Seraphim. Vegapunk flips a switch, and they all turn against the Tenryubito. They turn against the world government. I could picture it where, like, there's Pacifistas helping out the Tenryubito, and then Vegapunk switches, a thing on, and then all of a sudden the Pacifista, like, stops and just and then just, like, punches, like, Charlos in the face or something for, like, the 3rd time we get to see Charlos punched. There's that, and I think that's probably where this is going. There, you kind of need a man on the inside to make this work, and that also might have been what Vegapunk meant when he said, pay attention to the goal. Don't lose sight of the goal. Don't start thinking like all of the Marines, all of the world government, every single individual employee is like your enemy now. Think about the focus here, okay, the Tenryubito. And you don't just gain trust with the Tenryubito overnight, so that's also a reason why Vegapunk joined up. He's like, yeah, I have research funding, I can now build Egghead Island, I can have my crazy laboratory that I always wanted to have. I can make all the crazy technology that's been in my head forever. I can perfect my island aircon system I tried to start at Karakuri. Like, I can do all that stuff now while also gathering intel on the government from within. And I'm sure Vegapunk has a lot of allies, definitely in the Marines. Like, Smoker is definitely an ally. I would imagine Aokiji would also be an ally there. But also probably allies in the world government itself. You know what I mean? Like, he might not know all of the deep secrets, but he's smart enough to figure it out, just like what happened with O'Hara. He found all the research of O'Hara, so even though he doesn't know everything the world government knows, he knows quite a bit. There's also the whole thing where if Robin studied poneglyphs on O'Hara, that's how she learned how to read them. Same thing with Vegapunk. Like, if Vegapunk has all the research that Robin read, like, Robin had to learn how to read poneglyphs from somewhere, so therefore, Vegapunk probably should have a good idea about reading poneglyphs as well. He might know where the last one is, maybe, or maybe he doesn't know. He knows where to find Saul at Elbaf, and Saul would know where the 4th road poneglyph is if Saul doesn't just have it in his possession already. Like, it was in the possession of the Giants the entire time. Maybe Whitebeard ordered or asked the Giants to take the poneglyph out of Fishman Island back to their homeland because it was too dangerous there, because pirates started attacking Fishman Island. And after Roger was executed, maybe Whitebeard, because Whitebeard had control over Fishman Island, Whitebeard was like, okay, a lot of pirates are going to be coming to Fishman Island here. I'll take it over, but maybe this poneglyph, maybe it shouldn't stay here because it's dangerous and a lot of pirates might find it. So I'll give it to the Giants, and maybe the Giants can take it away. So that's, once again, another discussion for another day. Let's see. We talked about Vegapunk's age. We talked about him joining the world government. We see him at the end of the chapter. Let's talk about how he actually shows up in the present. So part of his head is, or most of his head is completely lopped off now. It really looks like he took a laser beam and just and just cut off his head. I'm interested in knowing exactly how. It's kind of like the same thing with Dr. Gero and Android 19 in Dragon Ball. Like, Dr. Gero turned himself into an android or a cyborg. You know, how exactly did he do that? And there is a reason, by the way, given in the manga. I think he built Android 19 first, the mime android, and then he programmed that android to turn himself into an android. So Android 19 is the one that did the operation. So, you know, now this is One Piece once again. Like I said, you know, drinking milk, you know, heals teeth and everything like that. So if Oda wants to just come out and say that, like, oh yeah, Vegapunk just cut off his own head and then operated on his own body and then created 6 satellites, I'd buy it. I would buy it, sure. You know why? Because look at Frankie. Do you know Frankie's backstory on how he became a cyborg? He was hit by a freight train, crawled out into an island of scrap metal, and then turned himself into a cyborg. No one else was there to help him with that. Frankie was just like, okay, every bone in my body's broken now. He just a bunch of scrap metal, rusty nails and shit. All right, time to get to work. Bang! Bang! And then, like, couple of days later, I'm super! I turned myself into a battle cyborg. You know, so it's One Piece. Just go with it, right? The exact methodology of how he turned himself into 6 different bodies, how he cut off his head. You could also say because his brain was so big, he just cut off his head and he could take, you know, that off and he could still operate because he still has the rest of his brain in there. I'm curious what the apple thing is connected to, though, because it really does look like he just took a wooden stick and then just stabbed himself in the top of the head and then put the apple core top on that. And that's not the apple core, but the top of the apple. And then that was it. So there. I don't know, by the way, the apple reference, I'm thinking it's just a reference to Isaac Newton, right? Like the Isaac Newton, the apple, like gravity exists. Oh, and by the way, as a quick caveat with that, I don't think the apple actually hit Isaac Newton on the head. Like, I don't think that's the way he originally wrote about it. I think it's like the apple he was sitting under a tree and an apple just fell. And that just kind of, like, helped him, like, figure out, like, wait a second, right? I mean, if you really want to get technical into it, we could be talking about Hook, but, you know, another day. Probably actually not. I'm going to be making a video about Isaac Newton soon. I'm like, no. But there's more to that story. Anyway, so that's probably what that reference to the apple is for. He has some sort of teleportation device, I think, because he was able to, like, zoom and then, like, teleport to where Luffy and Bonnie and Jinbei and Chopper were. And so I think he was, like, phasing, like, space-time was bending inside of the robot. Oda is going to take the teachings and the theories proposed by Albert Einstein and is going to bend them in a bunch of crazy different ways in his manga. You know, like, the bending of space-time, that's probably going to be taken very, very literally, I think, in the story, where Vegapunk might just be walking around through his lab, and then his whole body, like, bends through, like, a tiny little straw out to the other end, and it's like, whoop! And then Luffy and Chopper are like, that's crazy, how did you do that? And then Vegapunk would just be like, Quasar, I bent space-time, no big deal. You know, it's just gonna be fun. It's a manga, it's fictional, all right? It's just, we're having fun with this. Nobody reads One Piece to actually learn about physics, okay? Well, wait, hold on a second here. Let's see. The physics of Nami's boobs. You might have something there. We might have something to research there. You could actually maybe write a dissertation on that. Get your doctorate. But anyway, that's, I think, everything I wanted to cover main about Vegapunk in this video. There's a lot of tangents that I kind of went off on there. The dragon and Olvia thing, that's something else for another day. The location of the last road poneglyph, that's a story for another day. Vegapunk probably does not have it right here. He probably just knows where it is, okay, or knows where, you know, Saul could find it, or Saul knows where it is. So that's going to be the point of this arc. I really don't think Egghead is going to last, you know, it's going to last, you know, longer than just like a few chapters. Like, we're not near the end or anything like that. But, you know, Zoe was like 30 chapters, so maybe like something like that. Maybe like 30-something chapters, because we still have the Cypher Pole to show up and everything. I think what's going to happen is, you know, the next few chapters are going to be a lot of exposition. We're going to be finding out a lot about, you know, the Void Century and O'Hara and the information that was left behind that Vegapunk has access to. Shaka's going to show the Straw Hats in the lab something. Vegapunk's going to talk to Luffy about Dragon. We're going to find out a lot about that stuff. And then after a few chapters, then the Cypher Pole Zero are going to show, you know, Lucci, Kaku, Stussy, and everybody. And then
then there's going to be like a conflict in the arc, and then the fights, and the Seraphim are going to be involved in that, and the giant robots are going to be involved in that, and the satellite bodies are going to be involved in that. And then after that conflict is settled, there'll be like a post-battle sort of like rest and reprieve, and like, okay, where are we going next? And then we're going to move on, okay? But I don't think Egghead is going to be a crazy long arc or anything like that. Anyway, that's the video. Hope you all enjoyed. And now we move on to Octopus Facts. Ooh. All right, so today we're talking about the giant Pacific octopus. It's the largest octopus in the entire world. On average, they can be about 33 pounds and up to 14 feet when they're all sprawled out with all of their tentacles and everything like that. But that's just average size. For the truly kings of the giant Pacific octopus, we have 110 pounds and 20 feet when they're all sprawled out. 20 feet with like all their tentacles and everything. Like this wall behind me right here, this is not 20 feet. So I'm picturing like a giant Pacific octopus just latched onto my wall with like tentacles coming up into the ceiling and on the floor and crap. It's a big octopus. Let's see here. Now, oh, here's something I forgot to bring up. So very much like squids, the ways that octopus eat, they're very squishy, but they also have a beak. They have a beak like underneath like their head area. I don't know. I don't know the whole anatomy of an octopus, but they have a beak under there that's made of like dentine, which is like the same material like keratin. I don't think it's keratin. It's something similar to keratin though. It's the same stuff that like a parrot's beak is made out of, like a bird beak. Okay, so they have a beak there, and they use that beak to actually like crack open like clams and like shellfish in order to eat. So they eat oysters and crabs, and the giant Pacific octopus gets so big they can even chow down on like lobsters and stuff, right? And even other octopi. They're kind of carnivorous. That's just it's nature. What are you gonna do? Let's see here. Now, they do still have predators, like certain sharks will hunt them. Sharks and octopus kind of have like a back and forth, as well as squids. The giant squid, you know. Sperm whales are also a predator of the giant Pacific octopus. Now, because of their size, they actually end up living longer than your average octopus. Octopi usually only live about maybe a year. They have that 1-year cycle, and as I mentioned last time, it's because a lot of times they'll give birth to a bunch of eggs, and the mother will just stay there and just not like leave, and then she'll die of starvation. The males die shortly after mating, usually only 1 year about of a life cycle there, but they have 70,000 eggs, and most of the eggs have a high success rate because the mother always stays behind to protect them. In the case with the giant Pacific octopus, they can live up to 3 to 5 years, and they can actually lay over 120 to 400,000 eggs in their lifetime. Insane numbers there, okay? So the octopi, they're definitely doing okay. Anyway, that's the video. Hope you all enjoyed. Later, everyone. Signing out.